This is in the same league as American Werewolf in London, except it takes place in Paris. It's more of an update than a sequel, and done pretty well. Andy and a bunch of his college friends go to Europe on a daredevil tour, where they score each other on dangerous stunts. Andy's got something big up his sleeve, and we later find out that he plans to bungee jump from the Eiffel Tower. But just as he's about to jump, he sees a beautiful damsel in distress about to commit suicide, and in a leap of faith, he rescues her. Which of course lands him in the hospital. Andy finds out that the girl named Seraphine is actually a werewolf, and as you would expect, Andy eventually becomes a werewolf himself. But the story goes a little beyond that of the original. It involves a werewolf cult headed by Seraphine's nemesis Claude. Claude hosts these mock parties that target American tourists, in hopes of ensnaring and slaughtering them later on. Seraphine also reveals that her father, a scientist who was working on a cure before he became a werewolf, is locked up in her basement, which makes for a pretty suspenseful scene later on. As in the first film, Andy's victims visit him as torn, rotting corpses and tell him he needs to die in order for them to be put to rest. It's a little more ridiculous in this film, but we still see the dilemma. Does Andy try to kill himself to please his victims, who are already dead, or does he follow his nature and continue killing people? Ultimately, the only decision Andy has is to go after Claude, the one who turned him into a werewolf in the first place. It's a pretty suspenseful scene, although predictable. What made Landis' picture work was that it was mainly a horror film, with some subtle humor added in to spice it up at parts. It had a very surreal feel to it. This one is more goofy than scary, and the humor is more tongue-in-cheek. It's certainly not as memorable as the London movie, but it has a certain appeal, and it's still entertaining. This came out at a time where you could comfortably blend comedy with horror and make it work. It's very much an Army of Darkness film. It's meant to be more humorous than scary, which is a complete reversal of the Landis film, which worked in the opposite way. Parts of it are just ridiculous, but it has a likable charm that works in its favor. It's not for everyone. The reviews for it tend to be pretty weak. But if you're in the mood for an entertaining, goofy werewolf film, this is probably one of the better ones, because it doesn't take itself too seriously. The one major flaw in this one is the effects work. They used CGI for everything. In the 90s, CGI was still at an experimental stage, which is weird because they worked so well in Jurassic Park, which was 4 years earlier. But it never looked right in horror films, which for years was dominated with that familiar rubber latex and fake blood. It worked great and it was cheap, so when a horror movie suddenly resorted to computer-generated effects, it was disheartening, because you knew they were more expensive and they didn't look real. When you look at the transformation sequence in the original film, you may not know how they pulled it off, but it looks great. It looks like the character's skin is actually doing all those things. In Werewolf in Paris, they simply use CGI to animate the werewolf transformations, and it looks like a cartoon. It's a serious detraction for me, and is one of the reasons why it just isn't as effective as the original. However, when you look at all the recent crummy rehashes and reimaginings that have protruded from the bowels of Platinum Dunes, you come to appreciate a movie like this, which really is a respectful nod to the original. If you're up for a few laughs and some hokey effects, this one's not bad.
Oh my god. I thought, oh man, what did they put in those drinks?
You were hallucinating. It's quite normal for the transition period. Just try to relax, okay?
Transition period?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, was I dreaming or did you say I was a werewolf?
It's not a joke.
I told you this would happen.
Mommy!
Mummy?
Leave it to me, please.
You're making the same mistake again. First Claude, now this. Can't you be more careful?
This is different. Claude stole my blood.
Hey, Mrs. Pigot, I know this looks really kind of... How do you do? I can explain. It's really not her fault. Seraphine, could you introduce us?
You wouldn't want to meet me. I'm not as attractive as I used to be.
Oh, come on. I bet you two pass for sisters. Wait a minute. Oh, didn't you say your mother was dead? Oh, my God!
You scared her away.
I scared her?